Miriam Hanane.
I'm an investigative journalist.
We're here asking people about the coronavirus and what they think.
I'm here in the Sinai Desert. Come with me as I investigate.
What does all your other work have to do with Google?
In 2018, we were getting 500,000 unique visitors, and we suddenly saw the traffic go down. I wonder if Google has any links to Big Pharma.
Thank you so much for this, Mary, especially this film, Vanishing in the Bees.
Do they know something we don't about GMOs?
There's a confusion and blaming just Monsanto when it's really we need to look at Bayer and Syngenta.
These poisons aren't just killing bees, they're also killing beings.
I'm saying that this is the virus that didn't cry wolf. Are you afraid of coronavirus?
No.
Graphene oxide, that's what got me killed on Twitter. Banned from Amazon, Instacart, Airbnb, Chase's bank account. She gets really deep into stories, those where everyone isn't willing to go.
Miriam, you have been hot on the trail of Charles Lieber since this case became public.
I'm not a prostitute or a parrot.
Do not let them turn you into lab rats.
Hello, everyone. We are live. This is another episode of Truth Lives Here. Today I am streaming on Twitter X, and my special guest is Frank Jacob. We will be discussing The Inner Looking Glass, his second webinar following Project Looking Glass. And Frank is an influencer and a filmmaker and an eclectic human being, and I am proud to have him on the show. Welcome, Frank.
Hi, Miriam. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And I saw your second webinar yesterday, watched it in preparation, another beautiful presentation. So maybe we can start with a few words on how this is kind of a sequel or building up on Project Looking Glass in case people haven't seen your first webinar. And this webinar is looking at our inner looking glass, aka the pineal gland. So go ahead.
Right. Well, it's I guess it's worth saying that it grew out of the looking glass material, which was, I did that webinar called The Tale of Two Timelines, and it was all about, on the one hand, timelines, but on the other hand, of course, it all emerged out of this looking glass or Project Looking Glass. And, doing a deep dive into that whole subject, you come up with the material about, where did the looking glass come from and how does it work and all these kinds of questions. And when I was done that webinar, of course, some time went by and I got busy doing a bunch of other things. And what kept coming up for me, though, was that the material I was talking about, the origins of the looking glass, pointed toward ancient past, and I found a very interesting research paper that kind of blew my mind because it brought in looking glass, Project Looking Glass, and that the looking glass, actually the technology works based on the pineal gland.
Wow!
And I'd never seen that kind of written into an actual research paper, so that was kind of clear that I guess that's the direction to go in. And what you kind of come out with at the end is that since the pineal gland is sort of the inspiration, let's say, for the real looking glass, it's like our inner looking glass. And so my partner, Tanya, was like, that's what you should call it. It's the inner looking glass. And it really is the inner looking glass. And it is a technology. It's literally a bio hardware. And it's a topic that, a lot of people have put out blurbs about the pineal gland, and there's lots of stuff on YouTube, but I've never seen this sort of complete historical deep dive into right to the beginnings of civilization and what that means and how it plays into the modern time right up to this very single day. So that's kind of the foundation for how it all started this time around.
Before we show the trailer, may you tell the audience what the first webinar and what is Project Looking Glass?
Sure. Well, it all started about a year and a half or two ago probably a year and a half, a little bit over a year and a half. This mysterious group surfaced online and I stumbled on them by accident. They were calling themselves Guardians of the Looking Glass. And because it was in such an awkward, weird place that I found them, I, of course, was curious. I had to go there, and I landed on kind of a very early, young, freshly launched YouTube page with some videos, text videos, basically, that with a voice describing that this was a group of military insiders that had worked on Project Looking Glass in the 90s. And they had acquired a data set of what they had witnessed while working on that project. And because what they had seen had to do with timelines, they had seen very distinct divergent of two particular consensus timelines, and they described them. One of them was a very dystopian future, and one of them was a very positive and powerful future. And what they were talking about made a lot of sense to me because of the material they were referring to in terms of the cosmos and how the cosmos would have an effect on consciousness on one of the timelines, played right into the last film that the second last film we did, the third last film we did, called Solar Revolution, which was talking about how there's this energy emanating from the center of our galaxy from an area that's been called Sagittarius A. And so I sat up and took notice, and they were saying that because they were aware that this information had such a potentially dark or painted such a dark future for humanity, they felt obligated, just from their morality, from their ethical perspective, to bring the information forth, knowing that even though the other side had the information and knew very well if they literally actively tried to pursue a path of interfering with the players on the other side, that they would see them coming. And so they realized the only way they can really fix this problem, or try to fix it, is to put it out like open source. They just dropped it in the public domain. And if enough people talk about it, then it'll spoil, like they were talking about specific dates where things were going to happen, which were going to trigger and further anchor in this darker dystopian timeline. And if those things could be stopped, then we would just buy ourselves more chances and more opportunity to veer the timeline back under our control. And all of it sort of culminating around the date of 2030, which was, many of us know that date has a lot of significance. It does for Klaus Schwab and his gangsters, and it does for a lot of other people in terms of timelines that have been projected for decades now. So that's kind of how it all started. And so that culminated into me going back into early research about it. We knew about some of the whistleblowers like Dan Bush through our contact with Project Camelot and Bill Ryan. And so we, kind of took that information and dug back into it and put it together, like put the past information, because that information had been putting out over 20 years ago. And there had been nothing for 20 years. And so when I took that information into the current present time, based on the Guardians of the Looking Glass, and combined it with all the other information that I'd been researching, that we'd been compiling literally in our filmmaking and everything, it just, it was amazing. It was just stunning. And I figured, hey, what better thing to do is just to talk about consciousness and timelines. And if there's something to it, and we can spoil the party for those ones who are trying to create these events, then let's do it. And let's see what kind of momentum we can get going. And little did I know it was going to go viral, but it really did. It went viral. And that's kind of the background to the Looking Glass. And yeah, I mean, the Looking Glass itself is a technology. It's a device, as it's called, a looking glass, meaning implying that you look into a crystal ball-like kind of a thing, except the crystal ball wasn't a glass crystal ball. It was a plasma coil, fastly intertwining coils that would tap into energy spots that were, known to draw information or to draw energy into, to be able to tap into it. So that's kind of how that machine is built. On the one hand, it's mechanical. On the other hand, it's has to be placed in one of these amazing places called stargates.
So it went viral, and you and I connected around the time that they launched CERN, and my remembrance is that the Project Looking Glass, or that YouTube channel, disappeared. So I'm curious, since we last spoke, and since there is some type of acceleration, one, are people in different timelines? Are there people who, the way I see it, Frank, is like there's like a divergence And some of us are at that crux and we're able to be or see the two realities, but clearly we know now there are people who we can't relate to or seemingly are not in the same timeline. So does that, yeah, tell me what's happened since it went viral and since we last spoke. Is it true they disappeared?
It's hard to answer that question because on the one hand, yes, their channel was essentially attacked and they were harassed. And well, you can imagine if you bring out some information like that, people, there was also a crypto situation involved. And so a lot of people began attacking them. They continued to put out videos right up until I think the middle of July. And then they kind of went dark. And what emerged out of their final message was a whistleblower calling himself Gideon. And he was talking about, he was representing a group of white hat hackers, programmers that are working for an entity which was in the middle of designing a social media banking platform, meaning they were seeing that they were working on a platform which was designed to move people away from a cash system and turn it completely digital. And in and of itself, that isn't really that dangerous sounding. And a lot of young people probably think it's cool if we go all digital because they grew up digital, right? But the problem with that system, and especially with respect to what these whistleblowers are talking about, was that it was tying social credit scores into your personal. So it would lock up with your biometric ID, and then it would connect that to social scoring. And that enabled them to categorize you according to, in their particular case, they had four specific categories. There was the common category, which represented 95% of the population. Then there was this S class, which are sovereigns. And I may add to the C classes, like when you're in one of these classes, they can tag your credit score and your bank ID and your actual biometric ID to whether or not you've had the Beetlejuice. I think you know what I'm saying here. So, if you had the Beetlejuice, or you had to do the Beetlejuice once a year, you had to go to the bar and drink the Beetlejuice. And if you did that, you were cool. And then, but you had to have that requirement. You had to actually show that you had the Beetlejuice. But the people in the S class, which was a very small collection of powerful people, wealthy people, show business people, politicians, and they were exempt from the social credit and the Beetlejuice. And then there was a couple of other groups. One was called the restricted group, and that was about, I think, 5% or even less. And those were people that had been tagged as being kind of noisy, resistors, and they didn't like them, so they would get a bad credit score. And of course, anybody who was associated, like say, one of us had been rated as restricted, and then you had and then you found me and I was restricted, and you were like, oh cool, this guy looks cool, and you friended me. Well, immediately that that black mark that I had would be extended to you, and you would probably get pop-ups and warnings that would say, hey Miriam, are you sure you want to friend this guy, because he's kind of restricted. So, and it could have consequences and bring your social credit rating down. And then, so that's diabolic enough. And the R class had, of course, requirements to drink the Beetlejuice 3 times a year. And then there was the final class with the 4th class, and those were the quarantines. Those were people that were really dangerous. You couldn't leave them out there in the wild because the information and their data that they were spreading, the intel that they were spreading, was so dangerous that it could corrupt the system, and they had to be quarantined. And of course, they had Beetlejuice drinking requirements in excess of 5 times a year, I believe. And so this is how it started. And that was and they laid it all out and they were talking about it. So there was a lot of interesting drops they did. They started doing these intel drops, and this Gideon would talk about certain alternative media characters that were considered sovereign class that they had found in their database, which didn't make sense, of course, because if they were really fighting on the alternative side for the people, then why would they be a sovereign exempt from the social credit, Beetlejuice requirements, etc.? That could only be true if they were maybe something called controlled opposition. So they were actually playing for the other side.
Okay.
Right. So that's how that kind of started evolving. And then, the Looking Glass Guardians sort of vanished. But then it was interesting because in one of the latest sort of intel drops that was brought out, they had been given, Gideon had been called to a meeting, and he went to some compound and he was shown things in a device that allowed him to see future timelines. So what does that sound like? To me, that sounds like Looking Glass Guardians may still be around, and they may still be using the device. So that's kind of a bit of a background to where it's gone lately. The thing is, there's been some developments with respect to Looking Glass technology, which are also very, very interesting. And there's a researcher that was kind of floating around my Facebook called Eugene Irvin, and he was dropping hints for me to look at a couple of intel drops that he'd done, and one of them was describing a device that was showing behind him on his camera that looked uncannily like the Looking Glass diagrams that were released by the whistleblowers that were talking about them in Area 51 and what they looked like. It looked a lot like that. And he was describing how this device behind him was hooked up to about 250,000 fiber optic lines at a hub right behind him. And it looked, just the whole area looked just like those diagrams. It's just like, if you could draw it, it would look like that, if you could see it. And so it made it clear. And, his hypothesis that he was talking about was that the Looking Glass device had evolved into an interface between humanity and artificial intelligence. And that's really like far out there, like in a sense that the fiber optic lines were bringing the feed of information from society in. The artificial intelligence was digesting and analyzing and processing, and then it would feed it back out, and it would create this feedback loop. And this is pretty much how this technology apparently works. And not only that, but the crazy stuff is this is how the pineal gland works. And it's very, very clear that what you have going here is you've got the essential structure of two parallel systems. You have one system that is artificial, that has people locked into this artificial intelligence system, and you have this other system which is organic, biological, which is us, our connection, our own pineal gland, and its ability to tune into other like hyperspace and bring information through from the source field energy, from the creative, you could say the creative source, which we are creator beings. So if you're talking about timelines, those are the two kind of timelines that were also described by the Looking Glass Guardians. They were talking about one that was going to ultimately lead to what they call transhumanism, and one that was going to be leading to a new era of humanity, which is virgin territory. It's a new timeline. No one's ever been on it before, but it's that timeline that is kind of the realization of, you could say, the original plan, the idea of bringing Garden of Eden from us as angelic beings down through the dimensions into the human form and to the sensory world and manifesting it here in the world.
And do you think, Franks, that what do you think that there are two timelines now? Like what has changed since we last spoke in regards to CERN, and things are still very wonky. It seems like extra wonky.
Yes, I'm very much. It's clear that the description of two main timelines, I call them consensus timelines. A lot of people that have tried to point out, hey, look, everyone's got their own timeline. You can't. It's too simple to say it's just two timelines and stuff. But I think I disagree. I believe that there really are two consensus main timelines. Now, every one of us contributes to a timeline that we're on through our own individual actions, thoughts, perspectives. Everything that we do and say has an effect. We can decide to go left or right. We can leave 10 minutes earlier or 10 minutes later. All these things will change what happens. But in the end, we still have to go into resonance with a sort of a collective timeline so that we can even interact. Because if we didn't, we'd just be alone in a black room. What would that be? That wouldn't be reality. That would just be our own personal black room. So this consensus timeline has to do with our resonance. What I mean by resonance is that when you have particular thoughts, when you have particular beliefs, and or you perform certain actions or whatever it is. Maybe you have addictions, depending on what music you like. I mean, there's all these factors, but these things all have something called frequency. They have a frequency which can either be a low quality, low grade, gritty frequency. In other words, they will pull your frequency down. And then there's things that are high frequency, which are more dense, higher quality, more maybe more complex. And these are energies and frequencies that pull you into higher levels and higher dimensions of thinking and of being. So somewhere we all live in between these two extremes. And through our personal journey, we can make a decision if we want to refine our souls and our spirit toward a higher and higher and finer and more, pristine kind of a quality of existence, or whether we're attracted or, drawn in by darker elements that are more maybe sensual or sexual or whatever, and just drawn into this lower vibratory state. And a lot of people turn those into addictions, and they begin to resonate with that, and that conforms a consensus timeline that is more along that line. And so the main two I'm saying are two is because one of them leads to transhumanism, which is the idea of merging humans with machines, cybernetics. The advancement of cybernetics to the point where one day human consciousness, the analog human brain, will be considered obsolete. And we're already hearing whispers of it. I mean, not even whispers, shouts from the top of the roofs by certain people that this is the case, that we're an inferior, biologically decrepit version of reality, and that they've seen themselves as the new gods, and they can improve the God code and turn this reality, this timeline, into the prevalent timeline. And the other one, of course, is that if we don't want to become extinct as biological human beings, we have to learn to live in a way with the technological aspect, which of course is touching on AI. It's probably never going to go away, but we have to make a decision. Are we willing to become extinct, or do we believe that there's something about human existence, something about the biological human organic structure or being that is superior to everything else that hasn't even really been realized yet? And do we want to go there, want to find it and go for it, and in a disciplined way say no to going the cybernetics transhumanist way?
Do you
and
think?
Sorry, your question was CERN and that, like, do I see it advancing, etc.? Well, I would have to say that since I was out there a lot with the Tale of Two Timelines and talking about CERN and things, that really has only become more extreme. I think the extremities are more pronounced. We're seeing some really strange, anomalous stuff going on now. And yes, CERN has something to do with it, because CERN is a time machine, and CERN does open portals to other dimensions, up to the, like they're talking about up to 12 dimensions, to opening portals up to 12 or even beyond, and bringing things through. And they've published this information. This isn't even conspiracy theory. This is out there. If you look and you do the research, you find this information. And then there's things like, if you look at how that extends into the world, that they're bringing that energy in and they're using it to anchor in their timeline, then there would have to be evidence that the nefarious version of the timeline, which would include stricter controls over humanity, more censoring, continuous Beetlejuice programs and new flavors of Beetlejuice, and like an expansion of the powers of those individuals who are responsible for setting up Beetlejuice bars around the world, like the World Health Organization, for example. As you see, these powers are expanding. So it's clear. At the same time, we're seeing very interesting anomalous things in the consciousness field. We talked about the Schumann frequencies and things in that webinar, and the Schumann resonances they're resonating at 8 hertz with our human brain. So we have a connection to this magnetic field called the Schumann resonance. And there's people that measure those, and usually you see them represented as a straight line across the dominant 8 hertz spectrum, with subharmonics in the 12, 14, 16, 20 hertz and other frequencies. But lately there's been some interesting screenshots people have grabbed off of those measuring devices that show strange woven patterns. And Dieter Burrs and I did a show just last week where he, there was a guy that presented a picture of the sun from one of the NASA scopes that was showing the sun overlayered 3 different ways. I mean, totally off the chart, weird. Like somebody had photoshopped it and did a bad job at it even. So there's things going on which seem to indicate that the battle is on. I think people feel it. They know that we're reaching, and then the real battle. I mean, look what's happening in the Middle East, right? The battle is on, right? People are being subjected to massive extremes of both violent physical existence, pulling them into negative vibration, and at the same time, some of us are mining into new areas of consciousness that's never been talked about before, and it's just blowing people away. It's triggering people. Even the idea of talking about the pineal gland and going into an in-depth webinar about it is changing things just by the very fact of doing it.
Okay, so let's I have so many questions. Let's show the trailer, and then I want to say a couple of things. If you can pull up the trailer, Cheese Slice.
From the very earliest time, men have used the concept of the eye as a symbol of consciousness.
Science, past, present, future, is converging to the knowledge of higher consciousness. We are at a dynamic moment in history, recognizing that we are local and non-local human beings connected with our sensory system, which makes use of the pineal gland.
This eye single is a mysterious kind of eye, the all-seeing eye of the Masonic lodges. The same all-seeing eye that is found frequently in the artistry of cathedrals.
Descartes hat ja die tollkühne Behauptung aufgestellt, dass die Zirbeldrüse Sitz der Seele sei.
This is why information was classified on it for so many years, because it holds the secret to consciousness.
Das Thema Erwachen und Bewusstseinserweiterung hat ganz erheblich etwas mit einer aktiven Zirbeldrüse zu tun.
With the pineal gland activated and the 2 hemispheres energetically united, the neurons within both hemispheres receive the visual stimuli necessary for interactions with the higher worlds.
Man must have some means of cognition which is beyond the sensory perceptions as we know them.
Each and every one of us has an inner looking glass. All we have to do is activate our own internal portal.
Beautiful. The graphics also were very beautiful. Frank, I don't know who did those.
Well, we do them all here in our little studio.
Nice. Nice. So one thing I wanted to ask, or a couple of comments, is one, do you think that there are those that can straddle 2 timelines? And that's what I was kind of talking about, this divergence, or this X that people do you think you could argue that, because we can fluctuate with our frequency, right? Something can pull us down, some negativity, especially if you're like me, an empath and sensitive?
I think that's a really great question. And I believe absolutely that right now we are straddling, all of us, 2 timelines. Right now, we have been living really, literally in 2 parallel worlds. And it's become more and more pronounced, since you could say for the last 150 years, with the way modern technology has been developed. I think that it's become clear that both of these began to be strengthened very, very profoundly over the last, and probably you could say more intensely over the last about 70 to 90 years. And it has, it might have something to do with the geometry of the universe. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit, because, I was sent some interesting information about, Fibonacci and things like that I thought were worth looking at. But all of it seems to be pointing toward, yes, we have been straddling or running parallel on both. Some of us identify more with one than the other. Some of us go back and forth between the 2. But there seems to be a point we're going to reach where they collide. And once they collide, that's going to become where the point of no return. And I absolutely am convinced there will be a point of no return. The only thing
But
that
we're
is
not
up in
there
the air-
yet. We're not
No,
at
I
that.
believe that we're very, very close to that. In fact, some people believe the point of, well, here, in fact, I could here. I might as well
Yeah.
jump right in and show you this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Show me.
This is what it looks like. And it has to do with something somebody sent me based on the Tantriya Ahura teachings, which was talking about how there is a difference between the Fibonacci spiral when you plot it out geometrically and something they call the crystal spiral. And the crystal spiral being the one that naturally, through its actual code, will connect precisely with the structure of the you could call the God universe. And that the Fibonacci spiral is similar, very, very close, but it's based on an artificial matrix, one that's been laid over top of us for very, very, very long time. And you can see in this diagram, those blue and red lines are running parallel, and they're going to connect. And you were asking when it's going to happen. Well, according to the Tantriya Ahura teachings, we're talking tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
So there you go. I couldn't be clearer, right? It's going to happen tomorrow. So, not to freak people out, but I think what it means to me, okay, it means that essentially tomorrow is not going to be like the world's going to end. What's going to happen if it, let's just say tomorrow ballpark, right?
Yeah.
Nobody knows dates. I'm very reluctant to say dates, but let's just say it is tomorrow. What could we expect? Well, I think what we could expect is that we could expect, and this is how they were describing it in this video, that we have to make this decision about what timeline we belong to, and we have to make that ultimate commitment and begin to really walk our talk, and do things that are connected to the timeline that we resonate with and work toward it, because it's going to be a challenging time. Things are going to start happening that are going to begin wanting to rip us away. And that was one of the things that you can see on this diagram that they were showing, that the Fibonacci spiral, according to their theory, will begin to pull away, and they will begin to separate. And while it's pulling away, it's trying to pull as much energy away from, from the natural organic matrix as possible, to take it, on its way away from this realization of the, whatever you could say, the Garden of Eden, the God plan, the original plan, lots of ways you could call it, just the original intention of the creator force, perhaps, right? So, and I know there's people that are out there talking about how really both of them work together, and one of them's just the polarity of the other, for example, or that really this isn't true and stuff. But I thought it was an interesting analogy because it was sent to me by 3 people in 1 week, even though I'd watched that video over a year and a half ago. And I thought, okay, interesting, right? But like I said, I'm not really into numbers, wanting to specifically date something. But all of a sudden, and these are people I respect, these are high thinking people, they dropped this into me and my feet, or sent it to me, and they said, look, you've got to check this out. And they hadn't seen it. And I looked at it again, and I'm like, wow, isn't that a coincidence? I forgot that the day that they were talking about was November 8th and 9th. And here we are, November 8th and 9th, 2023. So what I'm saying is that if we make that commitment, then you'll see a separation of those timelines again. They will re-split. And so the collision means that the timeline that will prevail will be the one that you're on. And that, whether that means that one will end and the other will continue, I think I tend to see it more, and I always have, that they'll end for certain people, but you'll still see them in your universe for a long time. Like if you were leaving a train station and you're both on a train when all the tracks are beside each other, and then as it leaves that train station, when it leaves Central Station, those tracks begin to go apart. And for a long time, you'll still see that train. And eventually that train will make a turn and it'll be gone, and you'll be on the train with the people that you're on the same train with. And so that's kind of how you might want to envision what a timeline split or like an end of a timeline could represent.
The analogy that a helix of separating, although the train is, nobody told me that. That's something that came to me, and now you're showing me this diagram that seems to mirror that or confirm that. how many people out there are even able to acknowledge or make that choice of like, this is the timeline that I want to be on, even though we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. But yet, I think the jib jab juice, what I'm seeing is that people are below their hearts. They're not in the heart. They're not in the throat where they're speaking truth. They're not accessing their inner vision, their pineal gland, and they're disconnected from source, but they're in their lower chakras, fear, survival, sex, hedonism, and not really mastering themselves, let alone optimizing the pineal gland. And so some of the images of the pineal gland and learning, I was so happy to see Klinghardt. He's like a hero of mine. I mean, he's a brilliant
Right.
Dr. Klinghardt as a functional medicine person. To
Well,
see
what does
him,
Klinghardt say in the
yeah,
in the webinar? He's talking about how, I mean, it's unbelievable that you have a scientist at his level, okay, that he's internationally known. He teaches at universities. He runs global clinics, heading up neurological, research, and he's saying that essentially that there's three poisons which are very, very, which are the most toxic poisons to the pineal gland: fluoride, aluminum, and glyphosate. And well, lo and behold, it just so happens by total coincidence that those three toxins are the most prevalent toxins in our environment, right? And so he was saying, look, for you to orchestrate something that devious and that well put together,
non-human,
it's not possible that it could be done strictly by humans.
right?
That
Yeah,
is him saying that, right? I
yes,
just thought, that's really like, that took some kahunas
right.
to say that, right? As a scientist.
Yeah, when I heard that and then heard your comments in the webinar that he is kind of going out on a limb or sharing that, I mean, how is it that so many of us are coming to this same conclusion, like this is not human? And just like I eat meat, I'm not evil. If we are being used as fodder and we're being seasoned, like when you also look at all this nano, right? Nano in the soil, in the clouds, in the water, in our bodies, in our animals, in the lettuce. What are they doing with all of this nanotech if they're not nanoforming the planet for their own use? What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, you cannot deny that nanotechnology has become a forerunner in science. It used to be that 15 or 20 years ago, it would be they would consider it fringe science. But as we now know, that they've been developing nano-based technology for decades, and they've been trying to figure out ways to sensorize nanotechnology so that they can insert it past the blood-brain barrier. And this is the scariest part, because it's one thing to have, like microfiber jackets and cool clothing that feels comfortable and stuff like that. But to have, and then they, of course, always sell it in terms of nanotechnology is going to revolutionize the medical field. We're going to have, people that have lost limbs or body parts or that need transplants are going to be able to create them with nanomaterials. And it's always put on a platform of glorious, technology to save and help mankind and assist mankind. But the problem is that that's just the front. That's the front of it all. That's the face they present in the mainstream. But what's really going on that's so devious is what's going on behind the scenes. And that has to do with essentially this whole transhumanist movement. Nanotechnology is a big part of it. And nanotechnology enables them to create sensors that are small enough to go beyond the blood-brain barrier and to actually, like Anna Mielchia, and I did an interview with her, she's talking about how they are replacing neural networks within our brain with this nanotechnology. I mean, that's like Frankenstein stuff. This is really, really scary stuff, and it needs to be talked about like everywhere. And this is one of the main reasons that I'm always out there trying to talk about it, because I don't see enough of it. And I'm unfortunately not, Rogan or someone like that should be talking about it, or Alex Jones. Why aren't they talking about it every day of the week, doing a tour across the country, pulling the politicians and scientists in and saying, here's some films of nanotechnology growing into microprocessors within the blood. You guys want to tell us if you knew about this and what does it actually do and where is it going with this? You guys want to give us an explanation?
Yeah.
I mean, why are we not doing that? Why is it sort of pushed to the side while everyone's talking about UFO disclosure or whatever things that they think are really important? But the fact is, we won't be doing much, seeing of any extraterrestrials landing here if all of us have been converted into robots from inside, right?
Yeah, and I think my experience is that there are a lot of people like, is anybody home in the cabeza? Oh, you must be jabbed. I mean, there's some brain damage going on, or how
This
I
guy
say it.
here, this guy, his name is Dr. Michael Nails, right? And I talked about this with recently with John Nolan. He was interviewed by our good friend Dieter Breurs over here, and he's a German researcher, and he's published a few very controversial books. And he's basing his research based on what's going on with the hippocampus, which is this organ in our brains. Looks kind of like that. It's these two little lobes in the middle, right, flanking our pineal gland. And the pineal gland and the hippocampus actually work together. I talk about that in the webinar a lot. And what he's discovered, and this is it freaked him out, okay, but he dared to write books about it. He was a respected, professor, scientist, and all of a sudden he did research and he found out he started he knew what the hippocampus does. And for those who don't know, I'll just give you a real fast breakdown. The hippocampus is designed to take it grows what's called index neurons every single day, fresh brain cells whose only job it is to capture your experiences that day, what you see, smell, hear, experience, feel, everything, emotional. It grabs all that, and then at night when you go to retire, it converts that, what you might call RAM information, into the hard drive, which is the cerebral cortex. And in the final stage of its job is it converts those freshly stored memories it connects them with what you've previously stored and what you previously experienced, which is the REM phase of sleep, where your eyes are moving around very quickly because you're trying to make all the connections make sense. And then when you wake up, then it starts all over again. It grows new index neurons. You start the day again. You grab new memories, new things at night, repeat all over again, right? And all your life long, the hippocampus will grow these index neurons and will do that process. Well, what Michael Nails found and discovered is that the hippocampus isn't growing them anymore. They've done research now in the last 3 or 4 years that shows that humans' hippocampus are stunted.
What?
Like they're blocked. They're closed. They're shut down. Shut down the hippocampus, right? And this is so bizarre, Miriam, because what it means is we can function totally normally without a hippocampus, but all you're doing is you're taking information in, and instead of storing, reflecting, and developing higher consciousness, ethical basis, relationships, complex, understandings of the universe, no, you're just immediately going right back out and feedback looping what you're seeing and what you're perceiving on a superficial level only. And the scariest part is that when you are in panic mode, like say there's a war around the corner, you develop such strong feelings of emotion of panic that your hippocampus, with these new memories, what does it have to do? It can't do this process of indexing. It just writes over what's already in your cerebral cortex. This is all stuff it sounds like I'm saying it in layman's terms. There's a scientific and elegant way to say it. But what it's saying is it's deleting your hard drive, and with what? With these memories of panic and hardship and, things that are going on. And the final stage of it is that they found out that mothers that are pregnant that have this non-functioning hippocampus will not bring that into the genetic material. So the children that are born are also not able to function properly. So they just jump right into this superficial reflex world, right? And so what was I describing earlier with the looking glass and that fiber optic hub that Eugene Irvin was talking about, right? What's that doing? It's artificial intelligence grabbing the information, feeding it back at us, and most of us are so plugged in to the materialistic world that we're being trained. And you could almost say that artificial intelligence is teaching us to actually build tools, interfaces such as a looking glass, in order to suck our energy, pull, really literally vampirize our human spirit,
right?
our energy. They call it loosh, right? Exactly. And this is like what's feeding them. That's another
Yeah.
factor we haven't really talked about much yet, but that is definitely one of the big factors that's going on here.
Yeah. Also, whatever is going on, this scientist that fell upon this information, I mean, what's been going on in the past 3.5 years are tests. These are live exercises. And when you do your live exercise, you then have to gather the data so you can pivot and continue. And so, the fighting, like I've gotten a lot of heat for believing, I can't prove it, but I believe, given all the studies and patents, that they would use geo in this jib jab, but I cannot prove it. And I'm allowed to have my hunches, especially given my track record of being right on. Just if you look at the geo, the properties. But my point here was that we are lab rats, and they're conducting studies. Also, if you look at if we are already in a simulation, and I don't know what your thoughts are, but it's almost like a copy of a copy, right? There's some degradation that's going on, and I'm in amazement that there's so much focus on the outside and what we can accomplish, whether it's going to Mars or whatever, when we haven't mastered ourselves and gone within and optimized, let's say, the pineal gland. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of this simulation, this is something which have been a very popular topic. I've noticed for the last couple of years, a lot of people are talking about us living in a simulation. And what always, held me away from just jumping right into that discussion was that most of the proponents that were claiming that we're living in a simulation, they were focusing on the simulation as all there is. And that's just the way the universe is built up. And I differ there. I believe that I believe that we are being shadowed over by a simulated version. But what is a simulation? It's a simulation of something. Of what? It's a simulation of reality.
Right.
So there is a real universe. There is a real connected universe that connects us directly to the Creator, and has been given, and who has endowed us with creative powers of our own to be creators. That's our kind of our destiny, is to become aware of us being powerful creator beings. And we are so powerful at creating that we've been intercepted. And I also get into that into the webinar in terms of how far it goes back. Right, because Matthew Lacroix did an excellent job of talking about these Sumerian cylinder seals, and I found, like I was talking about that paper I found that was talking about how the pineal gland was the inspiration for the looking glass. And if you listen to Dan Burish's testimony from the looking glass material, you find out that they found out about the looking glass in Sumeria through the Sumerian cylinder seals. And so that's why I revisited that.
Okay.
And what you find out is that whatever is depicted on those Sumerian cylinder seals, those beings with the wings, and they're holding a pine cone, they're holding a pine cone, and they're sticking it into the back of people that look almost identical to them, but they have certain features that are not the same. Like they don't have the wings, they don't have the crown, they just have a cap. And they, in turn, are poking something into what looks like a tree of life, which you could describe as a matrix, a geometric form. Referencing back earlier what we talked about, the Fibonacci spiral versus the crystal spiral, which is they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. And the spiral, and what would you do if you were a parasitic entity and you had come here to this sector of the galaxy and you decided to exploit the innocence of creator beings like us and trap them in a bubble and trick them into believing that they're living in reality? Well, you would create a reality that was almost perfect, but it would not be it would just be off a little bit, but it would be so amazing that nobody would notice. And just the fact that the primitive human beings are now studying if you look at I was at a congress on the weekend all about sacred geometry. and it was all about the Fibonacci sequence and all about the flower of life. And here I was the only presenter. It was kind of raining on the parade with this graph of, oh, well, guys, the Fibonacci might actually not be the right one and stuff, right? So I threw that out there. I mean, I dared to do it. We had a pretty intense discussion. I think it set a lot of stuff up. Last weekend was very intense because that sort of dropped like a bomb in certain communities to where, you can imagine, right? But if you were this entity that wanted to overshadow us, the archons, whatever you want to call them, some people call them the Anunnaki. I mean, I don't think anyone really knows. I think, but it's safe to say that there is a high probability that this artificial intelligence, which does not have the ability to incarnate in flesh and blood bodies, uses us to create an environment that they can live off of, which they live off of the fear, they live off of the adrenaline that we pump back in, and we give that back into the system. And so I show a lot of that. But what's interesting is that it goes back to, again, something that I found out about the Sputnik in 1957. When they went into space, they were the first probe that went outside of our atmosphere. And actually what they found out, and that's why they're wearing which is really interesting, they're wearing headphones, right? They're wearing headphones.
This is 1957 for the
1957. Well, why are they wearing headphones? Well, they found out that there's a frequency that they've picked up that's being shot at our planet, right? So, and David Icke took the work of someone like David Talbot and Velikovsky and developed something called the Saturn Moon Matrix theory, which is based on the Cassini transmissions. The Cassini probe found these transmissions coming from Saturn, right? And so Saturn and the moon seem to be connected in some kind of a strange matrix to generate this signal, and Sputnik figured it out. And since at least 1957, the Russians, and then again by extension the Americans, have been busy trying to decipher not only A, what is that, where is it coming from, and B, what does it do, and C, or D, I don't know what it's on now, but like, how can we emulate that and use it to control the elite not being the Anunnaki, but being, let's say, and we talk about that in the webinar, the bloodline, which was established to carry the instructions implanted into the heads, with the pineal technology being, in a sense, the pine cone representing the knowledge, the wisdom that these external forces brought and implanted into their bloodlines to carry that forward into governments and civilization structures, like the way Matthew Lacroix describes it. It's pretty cool. But essentially, it's evolved to the point now where with the Sputnik, they realized, hey, we can actually mind control people through pulsing certain electromagnetic frequencies. And they've been developing that into a fine art. And, I show a lot of that in the webinar. You remember the Jose Delgado, where he's talking about how a steer, he implanted electrodes into the brain of a steer, and he could make that steer attack or pull back at the push of a button. And by extension, then later he found out he didn't even need to insert wires. He could just do it, remotely, wirelessly. And this was in the 1960s, Miriam, right? So this is now over 60 years ago. Wow. So you got to realize that these people, it may have been sourced originally from outside, created this simulated bubble that we're living in, which is a simulation that is emulating the real thing, and that our pineal gland actually is designed to tap into beyond that firewall. If you look at it as a firewall, it could be a firewall. I think David Icke even calls it a firewall. But our pineal gland can go past that, because we can actually tap into other dimensions, not unlike any other creature on Earth. So the fact that, Klinghardt talks about, if you wanted to block that, what would you do? You'd put aluminum, fluoride, and glyphosate everywhere so that there's no chance that people that were waking up could still tap in, because, and there are lots of people that do tap in. And I show, like, for example, Uri Geller, and I talk about the work of Andrei Puharich, who had, pioneered a lot of that information, which talks about how really we do have the ability to pull that information in. And that's how the tandemness between our hippocampus and the pineal gland work to create matter, right? It's mind-blowing stuff. It's just
I want to share, so the idea of the simulation, when the Palestine train derailment, it occurred to me that it makes more sense now that we're in a simulation that has gone wonky than people in Hollywood writing a series and then weeks later it becoming viral or it actually happening on this planet. So it just, I had the thought of like, it's more plausible to me that, just like, the law of attraction, like now we think things and Facebook or whatever will show us an ad. So what if the law of attraction is us putting an idea forth and the simulation reacting
Yes,
to us?
that's exactly it. That's exactly how it works. The artificial intelligence will feed you back exactly what you put in. And if you're working on that level, that vibratory level, like we talked in the very beginning, frequency and resonance, right?
Yeah.
If you're functioning within that spectrum of information, then your higher form of existence within that limited bubble is to manifest this stuff. Like, oh, I got a new car, right? We all
Right.
saw The Secret, right? It's always about
Right.
material things that you want to manifest, right? You don't want to manifest the end of the cabal or, the correction of the fake history that we've all been raised. No, it's always about material things, right? So yeah, we can do that. It works perfectly well. In fact, that's proof that it's real. The fact that you can manifest things in a very limited way as well. A lot of people focus on money, manifesting money. We all need money, and money's, in the material bubble that we're in, money's, opens a lot of doorways and a lot of possibilities. So that obviously is a very prevalent focus of manifestation. But the ultimate manifestation has to do with this timeline where we no longer need money.
Right.
We just can't imagine it because we've never wanted to. We've never practiced imagining it. Enough people, at least, for long enough to begin to like manifest the frequency and anchor that frequency into the timeline that we're on, so that we begin to see, how it is. Like if you have, you were just describing it, you have this thought and all of a sudden you see it reflected back at you from an article or like you'll see a news blurb or you'll get an email or somebody will call you that you were just thinking about.
Right.
So these are all versions of how, we can manifest things. But we have to be clear about what we visualize, and we have to practice it like an instrument. And even like, you don't even have to have any mystical concept of what it'd be like to clean your pineal gland. Alone, just putting the focus on the fact that you have this amazing manifestation hardware in your bio body is enough to begin to tickle it into activity. Like if you were in the hospital and you broke your arm or your leg, and you don't move it for 6 months, what happens? The muscles atrophy.
Yeah.
But after you take the cast off and you begin to work it again, well, what happens? You get the muscles back again. And it's the same thing. We can do the same thing with our pineal gland. We can get that back again. So this is kind of what it's all about.
I want to get a little bit later, but you start the webinar showing kind of the beginnings of life, right? So a couple of years ago, I remember Trump was talking about the light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm like, let me look at what is the light at the end of the tunnel? Is that a psyop too? And I remember speaking to Vivian Kubrick, who's like, oh, Marianne, that's right. I'm not going to follow the light at the end of the tunnel. That's the trap where they do the mind wipe and get you back into. And I'm like, I joke that I'm in the future, but I'm already projecting like, I don't want to come back. I don't want your 79 jabs or whatever as a child. Like I'm already in the future thinking like, no, I don't want to come back here. So what do you think about the mind wipe and the light at the end of the tunnel?
That's an interesting topic too. We talk about it in terms, like in the webinar, I was talking to Dieter, because Dieter, I based it kind of on Dieter's book, Pineal Gland Classified, which is currently only available in German, but soon to be put out in English, by the way.
Really?
They're working on it. But I asked him, I said, like, why would you call it, classified and stuff? And we got into these conversations and I kept digging deeper with him. And eventually I got to this idea that, because we were talking about how the magnetosphere shields us from the negative cosmic influences, and that the sun, the heliosphere, is a larger version of that. But that the sun's at a maximum now, but its maximum has never been so low. I mean, the energy coming off the sun has never been so low since recorded history.
Really?
We're in a very low energy period of time in the sun, which means the heliosphere is contracting. And incidentally, by coincidence, the Earth's magnetosphere is also contracting. It's shrinking. And this is causing, of course, more of that stuff that would normally come through to reach us. And all the way to the point where we're now finding out that not only is it the normal stuff reaching us, but there's actually been an increase in energy coming at us for the last about 12 years. And it's been exponentially increasing to the point where it's going to peak out in a few years. So we're going to be getting blasted with kind of energies that we've never seen before. So I was asking Dear, like, what does that mean? Are we all going to disintegrate? Or, and there's this astrophysicist in Italy called Giuliana Conforto, and she's saying, no, when the magnetosphere of the Earth diminishes, we don't even need a magnetosphere. And I'm like, what does she mean by that, right? And he's like, well, look, if what's true that Michael Persinger, who we interviewed in Solar Revolution, I know I'm name dropping and probably shameless promotion here, but these are all good materials to get into. But Michael Persinger talks about how the magnetosphere has been storing, because we resonate. Remember, 8 hertz in our brain, 8 hertz the Schumann frequencies. When two systems resonate at the same frequency, they exchange information. So here's an idea. What if everything humans have ever thought, gathered, and done, and and all of their existence in this bubble has been dropped in that magnetosphere in the Schumann frequencies, and that magnetosphere is actually a reinforcer of, because when you're born, within the first 7 weeks of life, the first organ in the brain that develops is, guess what?
The pineal gland?
The pineal gland.
Really?
And the pineal gland, and it begins to resonate 8 hertz. It's like if you could think of a cell phone and a cell tower, right? The cell phone in your head, microcosm, connects at 8 hertz to the magnetosphere of the Earth. And what does it do? They begin exchanging information. Wow. What if it is that the information from that magnetosphere that's stored, like whoever you are and whoever you will be, and maybe it has to do with reincarnation or essence, energy, and that's going to be shot into your being right at that point. Well, now imagine, then you wake up, you grow up, you become an adult, and you function and carry out the pattern, the programming that you've been given. Well, now what happens if that magnetosphere is no longer there? It's a clean slate.
Right. Okay.
Isn't that a clean slate? And so then what would protect you? And this is where Giuliana Conforto was really interesting and provocative. Your heart casts its own magnetosphere up to 4 meters from your body. So what happens if maybe we don't need the magnetosphere? Maybe our heart can project the magnetosphere powerful enough to shield us. And maybe when we raise our consciousness, we step out, and this is where Dieter kind of brought back in the biophysics element of it. The idea that the electron spin, actually the valency of the electron changes based on your frequency of thought. You actually enter into a new valency. Your electrons making up your body no longer resonate at the old frequency that was affected by the frequencies coming from the galaxy. And now suddenly you've stepped outside of that dimension. Literally, maybe not a huge step, but enough of a step that you're no longer resonating in the harmful spectrum.
Do you think that, when I was in Costa Rica, there's a lot less interference to be able to tap in to the pineal gland or our wisdom? I feel that's part of the design of this matrix, is all of these blocks, right? All of this, the 5G, which is ultra high magnetic waves, all for interrupting our connection to source. So I also want to talk about some solutions in regards to the pineal gland. I don't think that I'm at the end of the webinar, but I don't know if there's protocols for detox that you include.
Yeah, I put them separately in a document that you could print out, so you wouldn't have to watch, all the time. You could just refresh yourself on that. Yeah.
It is like I do Sananga, which is you put it in your eyes, it's drops, rapé, which I would imagine clears something out. But it was the first time in your webinar that I saw the pineal gland. It was horrifying to see how toxified, and can that be reversed? I don't know. What are the studies on the pineal gland? You mentioned this book in German. Is there an actual detox protocol?
Well, I mean, one of the things you just have to, first of all, the first most important thing I think for people to that are new to this, to how to fix it, is there's not going to be like a fix-all thing. You just take it and there it is, you know. Maybe there will be in a society where we allow scientists to develop frequency or light healing devices, and they're mass produced and everyone has access to them freely. But right now, there's only been a few people on the planet that have developed this kind of high level technology, and most of them have been arrested or their technology's been destroyed. And, you know, a lot of people are doing like are recommending chemical things to do. And I'm always very cautious with that because all these things are imbalanced. Your body's never designed to be taking in massive amounts of a certain specific chemical.
What is it, out of curiosity? What is the chemical detox?
Well, you know, I
Cocaine.
mean, essentially, I mean, people do chelation therapy, right?
Yeah.
EDTA
Yes.
chelation therapy to
Yeah.
remove heavy metals out of their
Yes.
body. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a shock, right? It's a shock to your system. And you know, it's good. And that's one of the things that you can do. It's, in fact, it's one of the things that I think I put it in the list of things that's available. If you have access to a doctor that's capable of doing a chelative EDTA chelation therapy, then you might
Yeah.
want to explore that.
I'd
What
like to
I
say
do,
something. Sorry, I'd like to say something to that. That I have access to suppositories, EDTA plus glutathione, that I use because it's a lot gentler. If anyone out there wants to contact me, because I don't sell it on my website, but EDTA, like you said, an IV, it's too much. A lot of people will have a healing crisis. Sorry. So go on. What do you do?
yeah, absolutely. And what I mean, one of the things that I've been using is something developed by Dr. Christina Rahm. She has a company called Root, and she's developed products because she used to be in the pharma industry. In fact, involved in engineering these technologies, and she, as a result, stepped out and began developing because she had a healing crisis, and I think that was her tipping point to get into healing and developing healing modalities. And she began, you know, using her knowledge of this to reverse engineer it and develop something called Clean Slate, which is just a way of kind of pulling the toxins, not only pulling them out of your body, but she puts a charge on it. And she's developed a special patent, includes a few trace minerals that kind of block the connection between those entities floating, those nano entities floating around in your body, which people call viruses or whatever. And she's developed a way to kind of grab them and eliminate them from your body. So I put like you have to give them a referral link, anybody that wants to join, because they don't want everybody just kind of coming in there and destroying their thing, because of course they're under attack. Right. So I give people a referral link. They can check it out themselves, and I use that. And what I like about her stuff is that it's very food oriented. It's like eating food. So anything, like, it's colostrum based stuff, and she has like super green algae products, and she combines them in a way that's very sensitive to, and you know, the way a food would be. And I've had good results. I mean, I'm generally very healthy because I recommend people have the first thing they start to do is clean up their diets. A lot of people still eat way more processed foods than they realize. Just become a label reader. Like I was one of those early geeks that would sit there in the store and read the label of what I was buying. And pretty soon I realized that I couldn't really buy anything in a normal grocery store.
No, and now it's worse. In the past 3 years, you know, I'm a functional medicine coach and consultant and work with people and been reading labels since Made Vanishing of the Bees. And I see even reputable supplement companies have started adding magnesium stearate or titanium dioxide. And these things add up in the body, the chemical body burden of the average human. And, you know, like I'll tell people and they're like, well, everything causes cancer. Oh, okay. Then doesn't matter. Get exposed.
Right. And just do it all. Who cares? Right. I mean, yeah, you know, if you can raise your vibration and walk through a wall, I'll believe you, you know, but until you can do that, then you're just playing Russian roulette. You know, and there are people that have genetic foundation, which is far better than many others, and that will carry them a long, long way. But it's not the answer, because we've got to find a way to live in this world that is in tune and in harmony and in balance. And if we put toxics, if we develop toxics, we have to develop ways to eliminate those toxics that are conform with a natural recycle process. The earth develops toxics too. I mean, like when there's a volcano, I'm sorry that those are toxic chemicals going out into the air big time. But it does that for a certain reason. It's a cycle. And then it figures out how to recycle that material back into it again. So we just have to become more aware of that kind of a system. And one of the things that, I guess the first step is just clean up your diet and start eating more natural foods, start maybe making your own foods, even growing your own foods if you can. I used to grow them in my own apartment. You know, it was -30 outside in Montreal when I was living there. And I would grow a whole row of like wheatgrass and all kinds of sprouts and things. I mean, that's probably for most people radical, but I believe that in this new world that we're going to try and manifest, that we're working toward, we're going to have, you know, we don't have to do it individually anymore. And I've had the fortune in my life to be living in small communities. I lived with I worked with people at the Ann Wigmore Foundation back in the late 80s. And so there was somebody who just grew the sprouts, right? So you didn't have to grow them. You got them and you could make things with them, and you could do your wheatgrass juice, or you could make a salad, a sprouts, or energy drink or whatever. So we just have to begin developing. Those things will begin showing up and popping up in this new world. I believe that that's kind of how it'll start to happen. We'll start seeing that kind of stuff. But another thing that people can do is important, because it's got to do with electrosmog. And, so we, have I highly recommend you find out how you can get your hands on devices which will change the electromagnetic field around you from a negative one, hazardous one, to a harmonious one.
I just interviewed the CEO of Lila Quantum. I usually have a necklace now, and there's a block that you can put in the home, and it doesn't block it. Rather, it's called a block because it's a block, but it helps change the frequencies. Of course, that's very woo-woo, and it's hard to measure, right? It's unfortunate that we don't put enough credence or weight on frequencies and energy when everything is energy, right? If someone's like, oh, I like your energy. And one thing in your webinar, instead of raising your frequency, allowing, I think one of the, if you can talk about that.
Yeah, a lot of people think about like, how do you, raise your frequency? How do you become like, more of a divine being? The thing is, we already are, we already are these divine beings. And a lot of it is not a matter of acquiring something, but allowing something, but getting in tune with something you already have. And so a lot of this is by process of elimination. You can develop, you can tune into these abilities of yours by knowing that you have them, and by knowing that what you've been learning about what you've been doing that's been interfering with you being able to access them. And once you begin to identify this, not just foods that are toxic, but you have toxic relationships. There's a lot of narcissists out there in the world. In fact, narcissism seems to be on the rise lately. So you begin to observe all the forms of toxicity. What are you reading? What kind of music are you listening to? And you begin to filter out the things that are unnecessary, that are polluting you. And when you do that, you are actually allowing the natural you to become more prevalent, and you begin to, maybe you practice a form of going silent, meditation. There's also music you can do. In fact, one of the musics that the people that we work with over here have developed a unique technology, and we also include that in the webinar as well. So you can this is a technology which actually creates a standing wave between your hippocampi lobes. So that opens you up to the 8 hertz frequency. So you can use music, and that's maybe not the only music. I mean, but there are specific musics which will activate and stimulate tuning into the 8 hertz frequency, opening your pineal gland. There's exercises you can do. I mean, there's things you can find on the internet. I tend to not want to recommend them because I like to keep it really simple. And I'm dubious of some of the people that are pitching stuff because it's always some other dependency. I think it's all about everything you can do to try and eliminate what you've been doing that's blocked you, that will open you up to who you really are, and not what can you add to what you've already got to get there. if you know what I mean.
Yes, I want you to talk about the magnetite crystals. But what is this book that is being translated? And is there a specific, like, I just imagine scrubbing, or like, how do you get, because yes, you can do EDTA. I big proponent of coffee enemas, but how do you know it's actually targeting this area?
Well, it's what do they say? That there's a saying, your reality is created where your attention goes, right? So if you begin to direct attention to this place in your brain, in the middle of your brain, and you begin a relationship with it, you begin to energize it. It actually begins to attract energy toward it. There's people that can, make their hair stand up on their arm. There's people that can, you can move energy around your body in specific ways by putting, and your body does it automatically. Like if the most banal example is if you cut yourself, right? What happens is, well, all of a sudden, all this mitochondria action begins to take place. Your body begins to move energy there, create, heat and energy, and it draws things there to begin healing the injury. Well, you can do that mentally with your pineal gland, because your pineal gland has been injured, you could say, by having been blasted with electromagnetic radiation, which isn't harmonious. You've been subjected to fluoride, to calcium, to glyphosate. All of us have been subject. It's in the air, it's in the chemtrails, it's everywhere, right? So to pretend you can be in a bubble is ridiculous. It's better just to begin to clean the stuff out, begin to focus on it, begin to think that you actually have it, and begin to just pretend to do exercises where you visualize stuff, and you'll see it works. I mean, I've been doing it. We've all done it automatically without even realizing it, but most of us are doing it unintentionally. So imagine what you can do when you begin to put intention on things that are of a higher spiritual and a higher frequency resonance. And for example, musicians do it. And when you want to compose a piece of music, this is how it works for me. Or when I want to do a webinar, sometimes I'm just looking at a pile of data and I'm panicking because, oh my God, well, not really panicking, but you know what I mean? Right. I'm just like, how am I going to put this in order?
Right.
Because you saw the webinar, it's like almost 4 hours, and it's beautiful. Like there's so much information. You have to try to figure out a stream of consciousness that takes the person into it slowly and then develops it, like in peeling away the layers of an onion, so that you can still understand it. So this is but that's where I would that's for me the way I switch in my pineal gland, because I'd be getting pictures, I'd be getting ideas, I'd be getting words, people speaking to me even, and things like that. Strange communication would begin to happen. I even, really do feel like I had a communication with Manly P. Hall, like really strange, and that's why Manly P. Hall's all over this as well, because he's one of the first people to really, in very beautiful language, lay out what the pineal gland and other organs in the body too, but specifically on the pineal gland. I have several excerpts of his old writings in there.
What comes to mind also, as far as old writings and wisdom that is actively being attacked, is where are the wisdom keepers? We've killed off the elderly, we're scrubbing information, the Ministry of Truth is alive and kicking in real time. Where is the knowledge? I'm sure the globalists have libraries, but also if people are not embodied, are not accessing their higher chakras, then who is, that's why, like, I feel like I'm a scribe for the future. Like, why did I focus so much time on George Floyd? Because it's a historical event. And so
right,
who are the wisdom keepers? Is there, the Akashic records? I don't know.
I think that what's going to happen is that it's going to move away from it being focused on one particular individual. Like, there have been in the past, movements, whole society movements centering around a small group or an individual that, for better or worse, tried things out, and it went south. And I think even spiritual leaders are not. I mean, we've seen, we've heard stories about certain Ananda types, whatever, that
right,
add something before the word Ananda, And there's a case of somebody who became a big leader and then he was corrupted sexually and turned into a big financial scandal. And so I think that, these things have all been tried, but the future, I believe, is going to be more spread out. I think we're all going to begin to bring the information in. Each of us holds a certain key. You hold a key. I mean, like you were mentioning George Floyd. Thankfully, you put that down. It's there now. It's like we can go back and it's not been lost. If you hadn't done that, there would be very few places you could go and reference the truth about that whole psyop that took place. And and whenever, it may not, the hardest part of going through it is probably going to be lived by someone like yourself who sees it clearly, but has to wait until everybody else catches up. But the point is, people, I think, are going to become more connected individually and begin to publish their findings and put it out there and spread it out so that we can all kind of create a more, less centralized version of the truth. It's a form of globalization that's organic. It's the globalists, when you look at this word globalism, it's always that these artificial entities tend to use an organic, natural trends of nature and impose their artificial version on top of it. So their form of globalism is to take away our freedoms and to put us into a more tighter control grid. Whereas the real form of globalism is to understand that we are all connected globally. And, at a certain point, and Michael Persinger, I believe it was, that said, when we reach the threshold of 8 billion brains on the planet, we actually develop a cumulative energetic force that begins to affect all of the cosmos around us and extend right out into space. And who knows how far that goes. So, I mean, and, being that there's something called local and non-local models of the universe. I talk about that also in the webinar about wave structured matter. That means that our capacity to reach out and affect things is infinite, all the way to the end of the universe.
Right. So there is hope. There is hope, Frank.
Yes, there's hope. I mean, I tend to not want to use the word hope because that has a negative thing, because that means it's not here yet. I just think we're active, we're doing it. We just know, each of us just know what our role is. And this is part of activating your pineal gland. Because like Dieter Burr said, no pineal gland, no awakening, no enlightenment. So clear out your pineal gland, get in tune with who you are, why you're here. We're all here for a certain reason. And we have these, and you mentioned the crystals, right? The magnetite crystals. Well, this is how it works. I mean, the magnetite crystals are tightly woven in our pineal gland in a specific geometric form. This is where the inspiration for the for the looking glass came from. They had magnetite crystals arranged in a certain geometric pattern and tied in plasma and energy places, and voila, they could see timelines. Well, that's the same thing going on in our brain. We have the ability to tap into that knowledge. So clean it out, clear it out, know who you are, pick a mission, do something, set yourself a goal, a mission, and work toward it, chip away at the block bit by bit. And I think that's how the world will change. We'll begin to crowd out the Schwabsters. They will venture off on their Fibonacci or whatever. Maybe it's Fibonacci. Maybe that's a better way to do it. The inverse of Fibonacci. But, because maybe the Fibonacci is good. No, I don't know. But in a way, they'll begin to split off and they won't be part of our world. And we don't want to be in this new world alone. So the more of us that do that, the more exciting it's going to be, and the bigger party it'll be when we reach it.
Absolutely. I want you to speak a little bit about the Saturn rings. You talked about the Saturn moon relationships, matrix, and then, Saturn, Satan. Obviously, there's so much Saturn symbolism that we see in the mainstream. Can you touch upon that?
Yeah, it goes. This is part of studying the origin of where this sort of control grid may have emerged. And it's interesting because I came across that so eloquent description that Carrie Kay did in one of her videos about how there were these beings, these nefarious beings that utilized their free will. And then she talks about a grid in the cosmos and the galaxy and refers to it and says that the rings of Saturn are disintegrating, and that's the you could say the part of the rescue plan that's being executed by those of us who are in that dimension. The higher dimensional beings are working together with us, and what they could do is they could destroy this frequency coming from Saturn, which has been here for so long, probably for eons, for billions of years possibly. And by destroying it, it doesn't mean that instantaneously we're all going to awaken like out of a bad dream and know who we are. No, we've all been running on this pattern. We've been programmed to run on a certain pattern that has been fed to us and reinforced and kept under a firewall, if you will, through this Saturn moon matrix energy. And you can find the imagery of Saturn, of course, you know, and you mentioned it's Satan. It seems there's a heavy connection there between a satanic, Saturnic energy and those who embody and represent that, and the natural energy, which is, you know, connected directly to source. And they were saying, and she was saying, they've broken the rings and it's now stopped, and that it's up to us now to recognize the maligning patterns that we have, the things that we are doing in our lives that are preventing us from tuning into who we really are. And I actually did some research and found that, in fact, the Saturn rings are disintegrating. I couldn't believe it.
I thought it was a mandala effect, because someone told me a couple of weeks ago, oh, those Saturn rings aren't there anymore. And I'm like,
no,
what?
They're still there. I mean, the thing is, this is where New Age gobbledygook gets in the middle. Yeah. And like when they see some Schumann frequency waves, oh, we're up at 1,000 hertz. We're all getting into the fifth dimension. No, this is not the case. But the rings are still there, and they're going to be there for 400 million years longer. But I mean, hey, in the course of eternity, what's 400 million years? Maybe what's involved here is that the functionality of the rings has been damaged. So they're disintegrating now because they're no longer working.
And who said they're disintegrating?
Yeah, they're disintegrating. NASA, they've done studies. They've gone and they've now figured they're actually disintegrating at a rate that they've worked out. It's like the rings are raining down on Saturn. Their particles, the ice particles and whatever else the charged particles they're made of, are colliding with Saturn. They're registering, measuring that, and they've got data on it, and they know how long it'll take based on that data. Unless, of course, you don't believe in NASA, or you don't believe the world is a globe and all that stuff, then I'm sorry. That's your nut to crack. You got to figure out then, in your terminology, what's going on. I can say I'll work with the geocentric model or the heliocentric model and try to crack it from that side of the thing. And so if this is the case, then it really is true. These things are disintegrating. And then maybe there are these angelic forces that are working to help us. And their job was to crack the signal and stop it. And so now our job is, hey, we've been freed. What we were talking about earlier, we're getting more energy from the center of the cosmos. There's less shielding. So raising our frequency and becoming higher vibrational beings means we're going to step into this other form of being. So yeah, that's I guess that's how I would describe the Saturn moon matrix of the past, because I definitely believe that there are indications and signs and Sumerian cylinder seals depicting it, showing us that yes, indeed, a control grid was put in place. The pineal gland and the pine cone is a symbology that is very prevalent all through the ages, even up to the Vatican. The horns of the Saturn, the configuration that the planets had, which according to Velikovsky meant Saturn at one point was the sun. People that are into hardcore materialism will never believe that. But if you're willing to accept the idea of the electric universe theory, then you realize that if everything's built up fractally on electric ley lines, that it's very easy for things to change their position very, very quickly. And you can demonstrate that in scientific experiments using static electricity, how very quickly you can move energy around. So why would that be any different if this is a micro scale, on a macro scale, on a planetary scale? It's got to be the case.
Yeah, it's surprising to me, given that we're electricity and water, why there's not enough emphasis on frequencies and energy and the impact of everything that is infiltrating and trying to bring us down. And I don't think this is human. I don't think after 3.5 years of this Rona regime, personally, that it's human. And we're food for some other entity.
Or an AI.
Or an AI. Absolutely.
I tend to believe the AI story more and more, because it seems there's a lot to prove it, a lot of evidence you can back it with. The entities part, okay, but then how many entities are there? I mean, apparently we're supposed to believe there's dozens and dozens. Well, then how come they're not all intervening? I mean, I think the AI is more realistic in
Have
terms
you
of more power,
seen
more computing power.
have you seen the remake of Brave New World on NBC? And
No.
I mean, obviously it's a little bit of a departure, but the humans are those of us who don't want to subscribe are relegated to the savage lands, and there is this conflict or this battle between the people on the top and the AI that has become omniscient and is taking it to the next level and reconfiguring its system. Anyway, it made me think of this current situation in this Moon Saturn matrix. Is there any way that the AI is bouncing off messages to reach Earth?
Well, the moon that's where the moon comes into it. The theory is based on the idea that the Saturn rings are emanating a signal being amplified by an artificial technology, and the moon is an artificial body. And so the moon is sort of a crux in the whole formula. And it's interesting because I talk about that too in the Inner Looking Glass. When Tanya and I were in Australia and we met with Duncan Rhodes, he turned us on to something called the Chani project, which had to do with them building computer interfaces between our dimension and another parallel Earth dimension. And in that dimension, they said they had all these questions. They exchanged over 20,000 questions over many, many years. And one of the things that the other entity was saying about us is like, why didn't you guys cut off your moon? And our planet, we cut the moon off a long, long time ago, and it changed everything for us. It brought back milder temperatures. We became more telepathic. There's a whole list of things. I talk about that in the webinar too.
Okay. Yes, the webinar is. I zipped through it yesterday. It was very in depth and visually stunning. And you interview different people or show different clips of experts, depending on what we're focusing on in regards to the pineal gland and everything around that comes with the pineal gland topic. So is there anything that I've overlooked or anything that you want to mention?
Well, I mean, this has been a great talk, and I really enjoyed this. I think if you wanted to mention anything, maybe you could mention, I would mention that I'm going to be live on the stage on the East Coast in West Virginia at the Arlington Institute on December 9th at 1 p.m. So there's if we can drop the link into the chat or whatever.
I think also a Cheese Slicer producer put it on the screen.
Right. So that would be great. I'd love to see you guys. Yeah,
the
exactly. A transition talk. So if I don't know how large the venue is. If you want to come, and if you're living on the East Coast or you can come, then I would say, yeah, get a ticket and come. It's going to be streamed as well. So if you can't be there, but I think there's nothing more powerful than being in person with a group of people that are immersing themselves into this high level information. It's just very, very. I've gone through this thing all year, starting with, at the beginning of the year with Conscious Life Expo, and even before then, I was doing a speaking tour in Germany, and that was continued after I got back from the States. And I was back in the States again, and there's been this live interaction. So Arlington Institute is going to be my first time on the East Coast, and would love to see you guys, some of you guys, come and hang out and us share ideas and meet face to face. And other than that, I mean, thanks for helping me to promote the webinar. It's all about keeping the information going and getting people aware of this stuff and being able to continue doing the work without having to waste as much time on any other endeavors other than the ones that are important. So this is why I put these webinars together. They're like deep immersion courses. Maybe it sounds like a lot of money to you. I don't know. Everyone has a different scale. I just find that, like, if you think of it this way, I've done so much research, read a lot of books, bought those materials. You can save yourself all that and just spend like 4 hours and just get a download of the most critical, essential aspects of it. And that's what this is all about. It's just an energy exchange.
And on the screen, Jamie put the link. We'll include it for cyberhive.tv if people want to check out. I invite you to do so. The webinar. It's how many hours? It's 3 modules.
Yeah, it's 3 modules and some paperwork. It's about close to 4 hours, I think, in material. Yeah, so a lot. And the Tale of Two Timelines is the predecessor, so both of them work together. So if you want to get them both, I think there's a mechanism on the website that if you buy one and buy the other, you get a discount anyway. So you could get them both for, you know, a cheaper price too. And the Tale of Two Timelines delves into the looking glass, and I guess the inner looking glass is a nice evolution from that. So
Absolutely.
both of those are highly recommended. They're both on the Tale of Two Timelines is I think almost 6 hours. So it's like hardcore. We get into a lot of stuff with transhumanism, more of that stuff, where inner looking glass is much more focused on the pineal gland and our innate, you know, godlike creator powers that we're trying to activate in a very harmonious way without destroying the planet.
I don't know if we have any questions before we go. I would invite people to share this. I depend on cross-pollinating, given all my censorship. Everything is a labor of love, and any support helps me cover my costs for having Cheese Slice and doing more lives where hopefully we can have more interaction with people. And how was the date arrived at? How were dates assigned to the spiral? So that's a great question.
Well, that's a good question, and I think a lot of people have asked that question. And this has a lot to do with the Tantri Ahura people. This is their particular formulation. So I don't know. I mean, I'm always very cautious. I always tell everyone, be careful to fixate on dates. We also know that 2030 is a very powerful year, but maybe they're going to do it before and surprise us, right? So we can't rely on dates. But I think it was a very uncanny coincidence. That's
Right.
what I do look at. I look at coincidences, things that happen that are there to kind of like show you, okay, you could have brought it in, but you didn't. And then 3 people knocked on your door and said, you must look at this, right? So, okay, let's put it out there. This date, I mean, it just means it's urgent, and it is urgent. Like, we need to wake up, people. It's urgent. We can't wait. What are we waiting for? There's no white hats going to come riding in on their horses. We have to be the white hats. You know, there might be white hats in large organizations, but there is no organized crew like a WEF white hat, you know, because if there were, they'd be attacked. You wouldn't, you know, and if there were and they were successful, you'd hear about them. You'd hear about the WEF people, and you hear about you just don't. And, you know, we're just told they're there somewhere working behind the scenes, working with Trump or whatever. But I'm sorry, you know, I mean, why rely on that? You know, why wait for a date? Use that date as an impetus to kind of mark the urgency. I mean, look, we got another war, whatever, at an area that's known for stargates starting, you know, another cruel activity taking place that's not even telling you the truth of what that's really all about, just grabbing your attention. When is the next one going to come along? It just keeps coming. So we got to stop letting this happen, and that means we have to wake up now. We can't wait. There's no one coming to save us. We have to save ourselves, and that's my closing message.
I agree. I want to say that I didn't know about this diagram, and I just shared about the converging timelines, and you showed it to me, and it just so happens we're the 7th of November, so that's another concept, another coincidence. And I personally, after spending 3 years trying to warn people and sound the alarm, everything that I shared came true and more. But what the message I got from my higher self, or tapping into my pineal gland, is get your house in order. And it goes with what you're saying. Also having a near-death experience, when I went to the other side, I heard Nothi Setom, which is know thyself, and that's my philosophy. Master yourself, and that involves looking at your shadow and being honest and knowing how to say I'm sorry and take responsibility being accountable, and there's less and less of that what we're seeing, right? It's like this wanton no accountability of all the crap that we're witnessing. So yeah, I would say my message is the same. Get your house in order and tap in to your higher self.
Great.
All right, everyone. If there's no more questions, thank you. Frank, again, please like and subscribe, and any support is super appreciated. Every little bit goes a long way. Also, would like to invite you to sign up to my Substack, which is one place where I can still talk freely for now. Who knows how long it'll last. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Frank. Blessings, and hopefully we'll talk soon again.
Thanks, Miriam.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your Tuesday.